Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our People-to-People Victorian Talent webinar session for you today, full of updates and insights on the Victorian market. My name is Mark Smith. I'm the Group Managing Director of People-to-People in Australia and Frog Recruitment in New Zealand. So we also have some career advice and tips for you, as well as mental health-focused session from our guest speaker, Tina Winchester. So I'm actually based in Sydney today. It's a beautiful day out there, and I think Tina's in Queensland. But the most important thing about today is Victoria. So let me now hand over to our Victorian Managing Director, Erin Devlin. Over to you, Erin.
Thanks, Mark. Great to have everyone online. Fantastic to have you here. If you're one of our unhire employees, we're delighted to have you here, and we hope you're enjoying your role. And if you're a job seeker, we've got some great tips and advice for you today. And of course, a great presentation from Tina. So just quickly, an update on the Victorian market. So what are we seeing at People to People? I think back in March, when we saw the World Health Organization declare COVID-19 as a global pandemic, that was on the 11th of March, over the next 48 hours to end on Friday the 13th. The only way I can describe it is that job demand plummeted, and we saw almost all of our vacancies pulled during that time. So it was a difficult time, but the good news is that what I'm delighted to tell you is that in the last couple of weeks, we've definitely seen the green shoots of recovery starting to pop up, and demand and confidence is starting to come back a little bit. So that's good news. We have 3 months. Typically, it was customer service and supply chain. There were some HR and finance roles as well. We had a few business support and administration roles starting to come back in Victoria in the last couple of weeks, and our legal support roles as well are starting to come back, and there are pockets of sales opportunities. So particularly sectors where the demand is driven by people being at home, like solar or foreign exchange trading, for example. And there were also some pockets of health as well. So I won't depress you with the unemployment figures. I'll quickly touch on them for Victoria. Nationally, it is at 6.2% is the current unemployment rate. Of course, we know that's a little bit masked by JobKeeper being in place, and the predictions are probably closer to 10 or 11%. But in Victoria, we're actually at 6%. So behind ACT, we've got the lowest unemployment in Australia. In terms of comparisons, just to give you an idea, from the GFC, unemployment went up to 5.5% following the GFC, and that was actually the peak. And then we did see a spike back in 2015 up to 6.1%. So we're sort of at similar levels to that, but I think that the numbers will probably change a little bit when we see JobKeeper go. So that's the not so good news, but I do have some good news in this next bit around job ad figures. So we were already in a little bit of a declining market when we started the year. So with job ad figures down 6.5 and I think 7.5% in Feb and March, the early part of March. And then of course, when COVID hit, we saw in April, the job figures went down 33.9% in April, and then subsequently 49.9% in May. So there was a huge drop off. But the good news is that in the fortnight to the 24th of May, we actually saw job ads increase, and that was an increase on 39.7% on April. So a huge jump up, and the previous fortnight to that was actually 26.8%. So it's definitely been an improvement. With the biggest area of demand being consumer services growing 123.9%. So there are some opportunities in there. So what's going to happen next? I don't have a crystal ball. I wish I knew, but what I can tell you is that I think there's going to be a little bit of some people are predicting a U-shaped recovery. I think it's going to be a little bit of a W in the jobs market, and that being that when businesses go back to the office, and I think that will typically in Victoria not be until July, August, depending on government advice and what happens on the health front. But when businesses do go back to the office, we're going to see a surge in jobs. And not a ginormous surge, but certainly there's going to be a surge, and I would call that phase the business critical roles phase. So positions that are going to be necessary for businesses to run well when they're back up and running and in the office or in store, depending on the type of business. So we'll see a surge there. Then I think we will see a little bit of a drop in demand, particularly a tapering off when JobKeeper is finished, yet to see when that will be. But then I think we'll see another lift before Christmas, which is quite typical, and then certainly confidence really starting to return from 2021. So there are definitely going to be opportunities out there. There are certainly pockets of demand at the moment. And I wanted to provide you with a couple of career tips that are going to assist you in really standing out in what at times can be a saturated market. So here are my top 5 for you. I'll be quick because I know you're here predominantly to see Tina, but here are my top 5. So the first one is a little bit biased, but build a relationship with a recruiter, a good recruiter. Make sure that you know what they're looking for. Other way around, make sure we know what you're looking for and what your current situation is. Update us if your situation changes, and ensure that you're across all the jobs that we're recruiting for. So there's quite a few great ways to be able to do that. The first one is obviously to apply for one of our jobs, or just submit your resume via our website. You can also give us a call. Well, of course, we can't place everybody that we speak to, but the more we know about you, the more likely we are to be able to keep you in mind for opportunities. Sign up to our job alerts, which you can do by going to the top right-hand corner of our website, selecting candidate login and creating a profile. And then you can actually choose keywords and titles and specializations that you would like to be updated about, and we'll bring the jobs to you. And finally, just to keep yourself signed on or join our social media pages where a lot of our opportunities will be listed. So LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram are our main platforms for that. My second tip is that in this market, already people have seen a huge increase in job application volumes. So how can you make yourself stand out from the crowd? The first thing is to make sure that your resume is actually searchable. So when we've got thousands of resumes that might be coming in, excuse me, it's important to actually have keywords in there so that if we're looking for particular systems, languages, skills, or even someone that's in a particular location, it's really important to have your postcode on there and your suburb on there, as well as all of those key system skills and searchable keyword terms like accounts payable, receivable, or maybe it's a particular type of technical skill that you have. Obviously, ensure your resume is clear, thoroughly proofread, and has your clear contact details on it. We're most interested in your achievements, so list these in dot points ideally for each role, and it's good to be really factual. So you might say that you assisted in bringing something from a certain level of percentage and increased it by X. So we really love to see those sort of facts. It might be around increasing the team, the quality of team culture. It might be that you've contributed to productivity or profitability, or even that you've put in place, suggested an idea and that's been put in place by your company. So they're all great achievements to list. The third tip I have is to look daily and apply daily. So even if there is a close date to the application process, I can tell you that a lot of jobs actually get filled well before the application close date. So it's a good idea to apply as soon as you see the job advertised and that you are tailoring your response to that particular opportunity. Number 4 is to make a follow-up call. Some people are a little bit hesitant to do this, but I do think that it gives you a better chance of your CV being viewed, regardless of whether the person on the end of the phone is receptive or not. I know that at People to People, we'll always be happy to take a call because it helps us to assess very quickly your background and experience against the criteria that our client has. And it's always a good idea to have a little elevator pitch ready. Personality and attitude on this type of call are key because employers will typically hire for personality and attitude over skills, although obviously in lots of roles it's very important to have the appropriate skills and qualifications, but if you're looking to set yourself apart, attitude and personality can really be the deciding factor for a lot of employees. Number 5 is, my last tip is just to keep an open mind with temp and contract opportunities, because we know that a lot of our candidates that have taken on temp and contract opportunities have actually gone permanent in those roles. So it's a great way for you to explore new industries, gain some new skills, and also get to know an employer before you commit to working there permanently. Now, I know everyone's here to see Tina. We are going to have a Q&A at the end of the session, so please get involved. Thank you to everyone already commenting in the chat section of the webinar. It's great to see you here. Please post your questions throughout. Tina will go through her presentation and then have an opportunity. We'll be able to answer those at the end for Tina, and any questions that you have about the job market or career tips as well. Now, without further ado, Tina Winchester has 25 years plus of experience in the mental health services area in Australia and in the UK. Tina is the co-founder and director of Mentally Well Workplaces. She's worked with the Department of Health and Psychiatry as well in the UK. She's head of a number of employee assistance programs and regularly delivers public, corporate and mental health courses, and she's a guest regularly at seminars and events. So Tina, there's so much about you. Your qualifications list is incredibly impressive. I wouldn't know where to start there, Tina, but more than anything, we're just delighted to have you with us today. So over to you, and thanks, Tina.
Wonderful. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I have a little technical issue as I was dipping in and out as you were giving there, so I'm kind of glad to have got that sorted. And so Remy has kindly put my PowerPoints up for me. So Remy, I think I might need to ask you to click through when I'm ready. Is that okay?
It's totally fine.
All right, thank you for saving me on the technology front. So yes, I'm the Director of Mental Health at the Career Development Centre and Mentally Well Workplaces. I'm also a Principal Master Mental Health First Aid Instructor, and we do a places, large and small, global down to very small businesses, looking after employee mental health. So Remy, could you click onto my next slide for me? Remy, can
you hear?
Oh, I can hear you now.
Can you see the second slide?
Oh, I think it's just loading again.
Erin, can you see the second slide?
I can see the slide that's titled Session Overview.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. I am going to wing it. Enjoy. Can't see that yet. I'll wait for it to come up. So the session that we're going to look at today is we're going to look at what mental health is, what mental health isn't, and the difference between mental health and mental illness. I believe the next part of the presentation is around anxiety, and the reason I've included that in the presentation is because it's the most prevalent mental health condition in Australia and often the most misunderstood. We're also going to look at the different signs and symptoms of poor mental health. It's come up now, see, winging it works. How to have a mental health conversation, and often people are very concerned about what to say if they notice that somebody could be struggling. So what do we say and what don't we say? And then finally, staying mentally well. Thanks, Remy. I'm ready for the next one, which I think could be a poll question, but You can tell me if I've not remembered that right.
Yeah, this is a poll question. I've just published it. You can see, so if you look at the right sidebar or the bottom sidebar, you will be able to vote for the first poll. Okay, so we can wait for a little longer. All right, so the figures might change in a few seconds, but pretty much about 15 to 20% think it's only 25% of the Australian population have mental health. And then 20% thinks 50% of the Australian population have mental health. 53%, sorry, think that 75% of the Australian population have mental health, and only 10% think that 100% of the Australian population have mental health.
Okay, from that poll, that's usually a really interesting question that I ask, and the reason for that is that there's often a misunderstanding that mental health means mental illness, and it doesn't. In fact, the correct answer for that poll is 100%, because we all have mental health and we all have physical health, and there are times when our physical health is good and times when our physical health isn't good and we may be unwell, and that's the same for mental health. So if I can get you, Remy, to move me on to my next slide, which should be the mental health continuum, and I'll explain what I mean in a bit more detail. So the mental health continuum, this is where we sit in terms of our mental health. So we're not at a fixed point in time always with our mental health. We're not either mentally ill or mentally well. In fact, our mental health will fluctuate along the mental health continuum. And there'll be times when our mental health is good and we're at the normal functioning end of the mental health continuum. That doesn't mean that we're unaffected by stress and that we don't have any ill effects of difficult times. It means that we cope quite well with the stresses in life, usually with the support of our friends, family and co-workers, and then we move back down the mental health continuum when our stresses are removed. But when we have ongoing stress that we are unable to resolve, or we're going through some really challenging times in our lives, or our mental health is declining for other reasons, we can move from the healthy coping end of the mental health continuum to reacting. And that is when we find that our stress levels are really quite increased. We may be experiencing distress in some way, but with the right kind of support and intervention, we can still move back down the mental health continuum to being well. It's when we move from reacting into injured that we actually start to decline into mental illness. And this is the time when it's crucially important for us to be having conversations with our peers and our co-workers and our friends and our colleagues, so that we don't actually move along the mental health continuum to becoming injured, where our response to the stresses around us is much more severe and persistent, and it impairs us to becoming very unwell. Are you still able to hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. It keeps telling me my internet is being interrupted. So I'll get you to move me on if I can, Remy, to my next slide.
Here you go.
Okay, is our emotional, psychological and social well-being. And it actually affects every area of our life. It affects the way that we think, feel and behave. And we know that thought plays a large role in determining our mental health. And often people don't pay attention to thought. But when we find our mental health is declining and we're moving along the mental health continuum, it won't only affect how we feel, but it will affect the things that we think about and undoubtedly affect our behaviour. And then in turn, it will determine how we manage stress and how we relate to other people and then make choices. So it can actually affect all areas of our life. If our mental health is poor or declining, it can affect our ability to work, study and maintain relationships. Can I take the next slide? Thanks, Remy. seem to want to show for me.
The next slide is actually on. It's what is mental illness?
Okay, so mental illness is a descriptor that we use if we find that our thoughts, feelings and behaviours are becoming more impactful on our ability to maintain our lives socially, maintain our lives with relationships, and it will impact on our emotions and our behaviour. And mental illnesses are real medical conditions. We don't will them on and we don't will them away. These are real medical conditions. We don't say to people that have chronic asthma, for example, breathe deeper and you'll be okay. But I hear far too often people experiencing mental illness being told to maybe pull their socks up, harden up, or be more resilient is one I hear a lot. So mental illness, for some people, you can have only one episode of mental illness in your lifetime and never have another one again. It's only a small minority of people that go on to have ongoing mental health problems. In fact, in the Australian population, it's about 45% of Australians will have at least one episode of mental illness in their lifetime. Thank you, Remy. I'll take the next slide. And I'm sorry I'm having to do it this way. I did have the technical issue, but I feel as if we're kind of working through it all right.
That is what mental illness isn't.
Yes. Okay. So mental illness isn't a sign of weakness. It isn't something that people bring upon themselves. It isn't a choice that people make. Mental illness isn't a sign of a flaw in our personality. It's got nothing to do with resilience, as I say, and it's got nothing to do with pulling up socks. It's the wrong end of the body. You can't pull your socks up and become well with your mental health. So if I can take the next slide after that one, Remy.
And it is a poll question. So I've just published a second poll, which is, do you think employers support the mental health of their employees? So if you guys can answer this, and I will let you know about the results in a few seconds. So there is a trend. We can wait for a few seconds, but basically the trend is about 2/3 think that yes, employers should support the mental health of their employees, and a third thing that no, employers don't support the mental health of their employees.
That's interesting. So 2/3 think that employers do support their employee mental health. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
2/3. Interesting. Can you flick me on to the next slide, Remy, and I'll talk around that.
Sure.
So actually thank you. There is a legal responsibility for an employer to take care of its employees' mental health. It falls under our duty of care for health and safety. And also there's a moral obligation to look after employee psychological health, which is really important because we want to prevent people from becoming unwell. We don't want to contribute to them becoming unwell. And we certainly don't want to contribute to somebody getting to a point of crisis. PricewaterhouseCoopers carried out a report into mental health in workplaces, and they found that untreated mental health conditions in Australia cost workplaces around $10.9 billion a year. And that's a lot of money. And so the economic cost is huge. And although this is back in 2014 and that 10.9 billion could actually be a little conservative, it's still a significant cost to the economy. And that $10.9 billion is made up of 4.7 billion in absenteeism. And we know, for example, from the PricewaterhouseCoopers report that one employee who has depression, which is untreated, will have an additional 3 to 4 sick days a month. So it's costing your businesses. And there was 6.1 billion in presenteeism, where people rock up to work and they're there, but they're not really present and they're not being productive because they're not feeling well and it isn't being supported. And then 14.6 million in compensation. Sorry, it's not. It's 146 million in compensation claims. And the compensation claims, so for example, stress claims for mental illness are 3 times more costly than physical health claims. So the cost is not only a humanity cost, but it's also a huge economic cost on businesses. So it is an employer's responsibility. We do have an accountability as individuals to look after our mental health, but we can't do that if we don't have the right kind of education around what mental health means, what poor mental health might look like, and the kind of sources of support. Thanks, Remy. I'll take the next slide if I may.
Yes, and the next slide is about indicators of poor mental health.
Okay, so some of the things to look for. And my dog is snoring really gently by the side of me. So if you can hear something rumbling in the background, it's just the snore of a dog. So some of the indicators of poor mental health that we need to look for. One of the first things, I don't know if it's on this slide or if it'll be on the next one, but one of the first things we need to look for is changes in our sleep. So often we'll notice when our mental health is starting to decline and we're moving along the mental health continuum that actually our sleep will be impacted quite greatly. We might also notice a change in people's behaviour. So we might notice them acting out of character. We might notice that, here we go, I can see what I'm looking at as well. We might also notice that we're feeling really fatigued, and often that's what people will go and speak to their GP about, a physical change. So I'm having trouble feeling refreshed and I feel really tired. We also notice a change in our appetite, and then feelings of worthlessness and feelings of guilt when we've really got no reason to feel guilty at all. These are symptomatic of mental illness. And again, it's not to say that if we're diagnosed with a mental illness, that's it, we've got it forever. Mental illness is our treatment. Can I ask for the next slide? Thanks, Remy.
Is it about anxiety, or do you want the 4 other factors regarding poor mental health?
Yeah, there should be another one with indicators of poor mental health.
Here we go. Can you see it?
Oh, it's taken me on to anxiety, but that's okay. Let me just give you a couple more indicators of poor mental health. So you might notice that that you're worrying. Oh, here we go. That you're worrying all the time. So you're feeling worried persistently. And we all worry about things, but this is a worry and a rumination that just won't go away. Feeling very low in mood and sad persistently, not the odd day of sadness, but a real heavy sadness that won't go away and won't leave us alone. And then the sleep difficulties I've already mentioned, as well as that irritability or emotional outbursts. Thank you, Remy. I'll take the anxiety one now, if I may.
We can see the slide now.
Wonderful. Okay, so anxiety. Anxiety disorders are the most prevalent mental health disorder in Australia and true for most of the Western world. But there is a difference between experiencing anxiety and having an anxiety disorder. Everybody experiences anxiety, everybody. And if anyone tells you they don't experience anxiety, then I'd be a little bit wary of them. So anxiety is a normal response to a stressful situation. And anxiety is generated from the little part of our brain called the amygdala, and it fires up the flight freeze response. And it's a fantastic way species as human beings, because back in the day when we were living in caves and we were fighting tigers to survive, it was the amygdala that would fire up and help us make a snap decision in the face of danger as to whether to fight the lion, run, freeze, and hope that the predator moves around you, which was great, as I say, for keeping our species alive. But we're not faced with life or death situations frequently through our days now. And the thing with the amygdala, which fires up our fight, flight, freeze response, which is anxiety, is that it hasn't evolved. So we've evolved as a species, but the amygdala hasn't. And so when the amygdala fires up, it's usually in response to stress. So we feel anxious as a response to stress, and then it will settle down again once the stressor is removed. And anxiety affects quite a lot of things. It's not just about worrying. Anxiety affects the way we think, it affects the way that we feel, it affects the way that we behave, and it has physical symptoms too. So Remy, if I can get you to move me on to the next slide, please.
See now the 3 symptoms of anxiety.
So physical symptoms, I'll talk you through those. The first thing you'll notice if you're experiencing anxiety is a shortness of breath. I had a little bit of a shortness of breath when I noticed I couldn't share my PowerPoints. but I made sure I took some deep breaths in response to that. So you'll notice that you'll have a shortness of breath. Other physical symptoms will include our heart will race really rapidly because our amygdala response is fired up and it's starting to prepare us either to fight a tiger or the danger, run away or freeze. We might also notice that we have a headache and that our stomach is churning. We have gastrointestinal difficulties. And that's because when the amygdala fires up, it's telling us we're in immediate danger, so we don't need to be digesting our food anymore. Our mouth will go dry. We don't need to be making saliva when we're fighting a tiger. We need to put all of our physiological energy into preparing to fight, flight or freeze. And then the psychological symptoms of anxiety are that racing mind, rapid rumination, thinking about things that could happen in the future and trying to prepare ourselves for it, and usually coming up with worst case scenarios. Other psychological symptoms can be things like going blank, completely going mind blank, can't think of anything. And then behavioural symptoms, that will include things like avoiding. So avoiding behaviours. We are built and will often do anything that we can not to experience symptoms of anxiety or uncomfortable feelings. And so we tend to adopt avoiding behaviours. We can also adopt some quite hypervigilant behaviours as well and start to become more controlling of situations around us to try and bring some balance into our lives and alleviate the anxiety, or even carry out ritualistic behaviour in response to our anxiety. Thanks, Remy. I'll take the next one.
Anxiety disorders.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Remy. So anxiety disorders, there is a difference between the normal kind of common everyday anxiety that we've all experienced and undoubtedly will go on to experience, and having an anxiety disorder. So an anxiety disorder is a mental illness that's diagnosed by a medical professional, and anxiety disorders are much more intense and much more long lasting. So imagine the last time you experienced anxiety. You might have done something like a presentation, for example. Often people don't like doing that. Or you're going for a job interview, which is anxiety provoking, and that's very normal. And you feel really scared, and that's perfectly to be expected. But with an anxiety disorder, that feeling of fear stays with you and it just won't go away. And people with anxiety disorders might actually be diagnosed with different types of disorders. And it, depending on the individual, will determine the types of situations, things, or people that the person with the anxiety believe exacerbates their symptoms. And anxiety disorders are treatable. They absolutely are. It's one of the most treatable conditions. And yet Beyond Blue did a survey recently to determine the average length of time that someone with an anxiety disorder will wait before they receive the right kind of professional help to become well again. And the average length of time was 8 years. I was absolutely floored by that. 8 years of suffering unnecessarily. We need to be encouraging people to contact their GPs and receive the right kind of treatment for these kind of conditions. Thanks, Remy. If I could take the next one.
So I'm gonna now publish the third poll question, which is a statement. Recovery from anxiety disorders requires facing situations that are anxiety provoking. Is that true or false? We'll wait for a few seconds and then I will come back to you. So far, we can wait for a few seconds, but basically it's in between 70 and 80% think that the recovery from anxiety disorders requires facing situations that are anxiety provoking. They think it's true. And about 20 to 30% think that it's false.
Right, so it is true. It is true. So facing situations provoking does form part of treatment for somebody with an anxiety disorder. And in fact, that's also true for any of us experiencing any type of anxiety in response to stressful situations. Because we are built to move away from uncomfortable feelings, We tend to do anything we can to avoid feeling anxious, when in fact, the best way to overcome anxious feelings is to face the thing that is anxiety provoking, as difficult as it may sound. But when it comes to anxiety disorders, exposure therapy is a really good intervention with a qualified medical practitioner to help people recover from the cause their anxiety. So thank you for that, Remy. I'll go on to the next slide if I may.
Which is about managing anxiety.
Okay, so managing anxiety. This is a question I get asked all the time. And anxiety is one of the issues that gets raised frequently in our employee assistance program sessions. So the first thing I want you to think about if you're experiencing symptoms of anxiety is to start thinking about your thinking. So when our thoughts start to race, when our amygdala fires up the fight, flight, freeze response, our amygdala will tell us lies. So our thoughts will be things like, you're never going to get this right, you're going to stuff it up, you're going to be humiliated, you're going to fairly, and then we start to tell ourselves things that aren't true, because let's face it, we may well have all studied at school and gone to uni or whatever, but none of us have studied mind reading, and we certainly don't study crystal ball reading. So we can't predict the future, but our amygdala will start to tell us that things are going to happen and that we're not going to cope. So check your thinking. Thoughts aren't facts. The next thing is to remember to breathe. So the first thing that we notice when we experience anxiety is that short, rapid breath. So if we take long, slow breaths into the diaphragm as opposed to into the chest, and then blow the breath away frequently, so lots of rhythmic breathing, it actually will lower your stress levels and bring you back down the anxiety scale. Distraction is a really good way to manage anxiety so that we don't get caught in our own head. I don't mean avoidance. I don't mean avoiding everything, but giving your brain a break from the rumination. So lose yourself in something that you enjoy. Give your brain a break. And check the evidence. Your amygdala will lie to you frequently through the day and tell you things like, you never do well, this is going to be terrible, you're never going to cope. But check the evidence. And the best way to do that is to gain perspective. So when we're experiencing anxiety and we're caught up in our own head, we find it very difficult to problem solve. And one of the reasons for that is that the amygdala will actually impair other parts of the brain. So our ability to problem solve gets quite difficult and we can feel confused. So gain perspective from someone that you trust. Thanks, Remy. I'll take the next slide.
Another 4 reasons for managing anxiety.
Okay. I'll just wait for that to come up because I cannot remember what it is.
The first point is limit your access to the news.
Yeah, okay. Now, I probably had that in there due to COVID-19. So when I first put these webinars together, I was noticing that we were experiencing a number of employees from the companies that we work with who were watching the news constantly around COVID-19 and really feeling quite panicked and traumatized by the whole experience. So limiting your access to news COVID-19 is definitely a good thing to do. Another one is to be present. Oh, it's come up. So grounding exercise, being present. A really good way to manage anxiety, get outside of your head and get yourself outside. So being present in the situation as opposed to listening to what it is that your amygdala is telling you. So taking the time to breathe and then have a look at the things that you can see, smell, taste, touch and hear. It will help to ground you. And that's actually a really good exercise to carry out prior to job interviews, being present to get yourself out of that kind of rumination in your own mind. Exercise, clinical studies have shown us that 30 minutes of exercise, at least 3 times a week, at a pace where we can speak but not sing, is actually as effective as a mild antidepressant. Exercise is extremely good for managing anxiety. And another reason for that is because when our amygdala fires up and there's physiological changes in our body to prepare to fight or run away, we need to expel energy. We release glucose and cortisol and other hormones that we need to release the energy. So if we go for a run, it can actually decrease us on the anxiety scale. And make a connection. We're not built to be on our own as a species. We're not built to be on our own. We can't survive without our tribes. So if you need to make the connection virtually, then do so, and preferably with a video so that you can actually read the cues of the other person. Thanks, Remy. Well done, you preempted me. So if you're concerned about someone because there's red flags that you're thinking, how is this person? I'm wondering if they're doing okay. My recommendation is not to sweep it under the carpet and hope it'll go away. It isn't being nosy. It isn't poking your nose into somebody else's business. To be compassionate and have some empathy. So if you're going to have a conversation with someone about the things you may have seen, heard, or noticed when it comes to their mental health, find somewhere that's private and free from interruptions, and then be honest about the reasons why you're concerned. So share with them, I've noticed that you're not your usual self, or you seem quite down. How are you doing? Reassure them of confidentiality and do stick to it. If you can't be confidential, you're not the person to have the conversation. And then maybe suggest that if there's anything that you can do to support them, let them know that you're there for them and that you'll help in any way possible. I'll take the next one. Thanks, Remy. And I'm hoping that it says something like, here's some information for you on some sources of support. So for example, if there's an employee assistance program in your organisation, then you might want to suggest that they access the employee assistance program. They're not just there for crisis, they're there for all other concerns as well. Another source of support is a GP. And we know that GPs, there was a survey of GPs, I think it was from last year, and these are consistent surveys that they put out. And the number one complaint that an individual will go to a GP practice for in Australia are mental health conditions. So that beats musculoskeletal issues, it beats gastrointestinal issues, it beats flu, it'll beat COVID. So the number one health issue that people see their GPs for is mental health issues. So GPs are a really good source of support. And let them know that you are there to talk to them if they need any help, and be there. Another suggestion I've got is that you actually might want to share with us some really good websites like Beyond Blue, Black Dog Institute, MindSpot is another really great website that you can have a look at some resources. Thanks, Remy. I'll take the next one.
What not to do.
Yeah, okay. What not to do. Don't be dismissive. She'll be right. Harden up. You've got nothing to worry about. You've got everything you need. Why are you so worried all the time? So dismissing people, telling them that they're weak, that we're not going to do that. We're not going to invalidate the experience. Try to refrain from saying, I know how you feel, even if you've had experience of poor mental health or even mental illness and you've got some kind of knowledge. That's your knowledge, that's your illness. It's not the experience of the other person. So try and avoid that. Don't pressure people do things. Don't coerce, manipulate, insist and nag people to go and see their GP. We need to go when we're ready. We're going to encourage people. Don't ignore the signs. They very rarely go away on their own. And never take over and tell people what to do. You wouldn't dream of taking over and telling somebody what to do if it was a physical health problem, and you shouldn't be doing so when it's a mental health problem. I'll take the next slide. Thanks, Remy. Staying mentally well. Okay, sleep. Number one thing, should be top of the list. If you want to stay mentally well and cope with everyday stressors, then you need to prioritise your sleep. And this is from clinical studies. So between 7 and 9 hours of good quality sleep every night is what you should be aiming for. And I know it's hard if you've got children, but you should be aiming for 7 to 9 hours. Check your thinking, as I've already mentioned. Think about the things you're saying to yourself. And then diet. We know, again, from clinical studies that gut health and mental health are very closely linked. So good nutritious diet will improve your mental health and well-being, as will exercise, which I've already mentioned. And then nurture our relationships. Being around people that make us feel good about ourselves is very good for our mental health. Self-care, finally. Self-care isn't selfish. Self-care is mental health. It's not a waste of time. If you want to be sharp and productive at work, if you want to improve your mental health and well-being in any way, then you should factor in self-care activities, because it will generate the feel-good chemicals and hormones which will help you cope with the stresses of the next day. Thanks, Remy. I'll take the very final slide, I think it might be.
Which is about resources. Yeah.
Wonderful. General practitioner I've already mentioned. Now, if you're not happy with your GP, find another GP. We're not at their mercy. There are some quite dodgy ones out there that aren't so good when it comes to mental health. So find a good GP. They'll be able to put you in contact with the right kind of services collaboratively. Nobody will be made to do anything. Use your employee assistance program. That's what it's there for, and it's very confidential. Beyond Blue, I've already mentioned, as a good website. They have some excellent resources on there. We've got some information for you that we'll send through on a link around mental health and COVID-19. And then if your organisation has a mental health first aid officer, then they are trained to support people who are struggling with their mental health and connect them with the right kind of professional help. I'm pretty sure that was my last slide there, Remy. So I just want to say thank you very much for being so patient with the PowerPoint delay. And I hope you found that helpful. Any questions, and I'll be ready to answer.
Thanks, Tina. We definitely do have some questions, and that was fantastic. Thank you. I know when we did our recent survey of our career seekers, we know that 50% of respondents actually were worried about their own well-being, and also how they were to get through this period of time. So there's some really great tips in there. I loved the thoughts aren't facts statement, and being present. I think we get stuck in our own heads sometimes, and it's good to get that perspective, and also advice how to help other people. So a couple of questions, Tina. We did have one right at the very start. I've got to find them very quickly.
It was from Sasha. Hi, Tina. How can we support a person with mental illness?
Although I think Sasha mentioned that had been answered, but was there anything to add there, Tina?
Yeah, I think I would add, rather than us trying to figure out, how do I support the person, the best thing we can do is ask the person, how do you want to be supported? What does support look like for you?
Yeah, fantastic. We also had a question on the career side of things, so I'll answer this one. Thanks, Kelly. Do you recommend changing lanes a bit, Tina, but do you recommend including a cover letter with a job application? I do. However, I would say don't let it get in the way of you getting your application in a timely way. Life can be quite busy, so it's important to get your application in nice and early. If you are going to include a cover letter, I'd always have a templated one ready to go that really speaks to what your achievements are and what you can offer, but always try and tailor it to the opportunities. So look at the criteria as if you were kind of assessing a question for an essay almost. If you've ever done that before, get a highlighter out, see what their criteria is, what are the keywords, and then for each one address what your experience and skills are for that. So I hope that helps, Kelly. We also had another question for Tina. What advice would you give to those who are embarrassed to talk to their employers about their mental health?
I saw that question come up, actually, and I thought that is a phenomenal question. So first of all, legally, you do not have to tell your employer if you have a mental illness. You are not legally required to tell an employer unless your mental illness is likely to impact on your job. So if it is something like you're taking medication, it might operate machinery, those kinds of things, but you do not have a legal obligation to do so. Personally, I'd be very wary about disclosing to an employer that you have a mental illness until you know how well your employer takes care of its employees' mental health issues. So I just want to be clear that we do have a right to withhold that kind of information for fear of discrimination, even though it is illegal to discriminate against somebody because they have a mental illness. Unfortunately, not all workplaces are perfect.
Thanks, Tina. We have another one. So if an employee is tired all the time at work but does well at work, how can this person be managed or helped?
I would ask them if they feel that there's an issue, or if it was myself. You know, there's a lot of people that will struggle with their mental health and still be productive in the workplace. So I guess if it was me, and I was, you know, feeling tired all the time as a result of poor mental health and still being productive, I would want to know, you know, do I not kind of deserve a little bit better than this? And if there was something I could do to improve my sleep, is it not worth pursuing? If it's somebody else that you're concerned about, and you think it's a problem, and they haven't raised it with you, then you might actually just want to have a conversation with them. How do you manage to get through the day if you're feeling so tired? Do you feel as if it's affecting you?
That's great. Great, Tina. If there's more questions for Tina, please pop them in the chat section. There's a couple more for us on the career front as well. Ida, you've asked, is there another way of brushing up your skills and experience prior to being employed? I think our virtual presence, our online presence is pretty important. So you can always do a bit of a review, have a look at how you're being viewed online. That's probably a cosmetic brush up, so it doesn't actually change your skills and experience, but it is important how you convey that online. So have a look at your LinkedIn profile, go on and follow some of the tips and advice that are available online. I think there's a few on our blog as well to update your LinkedIn profile, but other sections as well online, make sure your social media pages are private and professional photos and things like that. In terms of actually brushing up your experience and skills, if you're going to do some upskilling, I think that's a great idea during this period of time. What I would probably focus on more than anything is, rather than taking on a huge course, think about what are the in-demand skills right now that employers are going to be looking for. For example, if you're in marketing, you might want to brush up on your digital skills or user experience, for example. Or if you are working in a particular technical area, you might want to acquire skills in a system that always seems to be in demand. So Microsoft Dynamics, for example, that would be my advice there. And the other question I had there was, what are your tips for virtual interviews? So look, we're pretty forgiving at People to People with the odd family cameo or kid cameo or dog cameo. It does happen. But obviously my real tip for virtual interviews is to be really well prepared. So if it's with a recruiter and you don't know who the company is, that's okay. Try and research the industry, prepare some examples from your background and experience to be at the ready. So probably my biggest tip, I've got so many interview tips, so that's probably a whole nother session, but probably my biggest tip is, if you're asked a question by an interviewer, don't just tell them what you would do in that situation. Tell them what you have done in the past. So I always like to have a bit of a list of, or recommend that people have a bit of a list of experience and situations that you've handled in the past that show how you work really well and what sort of outcomes you've achieved. And if you've got them at the ready, you can kind of weave those into questions that you're asked as well. So are there any other questions? I've had one more on the career side. Two quick ones. So how do you address gaps on your resume? I think just be honest about it, and if there is a gap due to, for example, redundancy, that's absolutely fine to write it down. You might explain what you're doing during that period. So let's say maybe you have experienced a redundancy recently, and you want to show that you're being proactive during this time. Maybe you've taken on a short course. List that in there. Say, you know, I've taken this time to this time to complete this course, for example. If it's due to parental leave, you are welcome to put it in there if you want to. You don't have to for privacy reasons. And if it's travel, I would just put a little line about where you've traveled to if you want to, because it does show that you've got quite rich and diverse experiences. So I think just providing some sort of detail, whatever level you're comfortable, is a good idea, or addressing that in a phone call. Couple more. So do you recommend ringing the recruiter before submitting your application? Always happy to get a call, but my recommendation is submit the resume straight away and then call us, or do it at the same time, just because we can then actually pull up your CV at the same time and have a good chat about it with you. What else? Oh, what have we got here, Tina? I've got a few coming through. Remy, I don't know if you've got any to throw at me.
So we have one for Tina from Amanda, which asks, what piece of advice can you give to someone who has been bullied by his or her previous manager but don't have many references?
Yeah, I think it's really tough, and unfortunately sometimes in those situations it can actually be the employee that ends up leaving. So I think in that situation I would be very honest with the interviewer about what the situation was. You probably won't get asked, but you only need to disclose what you're comfortable with. So you probably won't get asked about this actually to get an interview. So you don't need to worry about having references on your CV. They won't be conducted till later in the process. So hopefully by that stage you have a bit of rapport with the interviewer, and you might, if you wish to, you could say, look, unfortunately, there was a bullying incident. It was uncomfortable for me, and so I left, if that was the situation. But what I wouldn't do is dwell on it too much, because you really want to take that time with the interviewer, focusing on all of the positive things that you've done in your career, all of the great achievements that you've had, whether they be big or small, and all of the skills and experience that you bring. So address it, but quickly move on to focus on all the really good stuff.
Yeah, Amanda, if I could just say one thing. Amanda, if I say one thing on that, you're not alone. Yeah, you're not alone, Amanda. It happens. You'd be very surprised at how many times there's been, and not necessarily bullying, but a personality clash causes somebody to leave an organisation. So my advice there is exactly what Erin said. Just don't avoid it. Have the conversation. And certainly you don't need to be prepared before you actually go in for an interview. But whatever you do, don't avoid it. And be aware that it's not an uncommon situation. So it can be explained away. Sorry, Erin, I butted in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's fine. I think everyone has a right to a positive and supportive workplace. So if you don't feel that you're getting that, then definitely talk to us, because we'd love to see if we can find a good opportunity for you. But there is one last question, Tina, and we'll make it the last one because we're just coming up to that 1 o'clock mark in a minute. What would be your advice for someone whose mental health has been negatively affected previously by their workplace?
The question
was...
Okay.
So it's okay. Sorry, Remy, I've got that now. Yeah, so if someone's mental health is negatively affected by the workplace, have had a conversation maybe with your employee assistance program. That would be a very good first port of call. Your employee assistance program provider will know your company fairly well, especially if it's a smaller provider. So we've got companies that we've worked with for a few years now, and we know those businesses inside now. The other option is to have a talk, obviously, with your manager if you're comfortable, if you have good trust and rapport with your manager about how you feel the workplace is affecting your mental health. And I guess finally, if there are no solutions to the workplace environment and culture, and you feel that it's detrimental to your mental health, then I know it's not an easy thing, but sometimes we need to prioritize our health over our over our jobs, and maybe it's just not the right environment for you. Not every workplace is mentally unhealthy. I can guarantee you that. There are some fantastic workplaces out there that really do value the mental health of their employees, and maybe that's that they deserve you better than your current employer does.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tina, and thank you everyone so much for joining us today. We've really enjoyed all of your comments and questions as well. If we did miss any questions, we'll come back to you and try to answer them individually. But thank you again, Tina, for a fabulous presentation. I think it's been incredibly helpful for all of us, and there will be a follow-up from Tina with a little bit more information for everybody. So thank you again. Have a great day, and we hope to see you all soon.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Goodbye.